marks 50 years since I left school and joined Lloyd's Bank as a postboy straight from school. So I've been around rather too long, and it's probably about time they shuffled me off. But I've got a job at the European Investment Bank, which is the biggest multilateral development bank in the world, and that's based in Luxembourg. And that's where I've been this week. That's where my travel problems were. And I'm also on the board of the Darlington Building Society. I grew up in the northeast of England, and the Darlington is 1,000 times smaller than the EIB. And the EIB is quite capable in one transaction of lending 3 Darlingtons. But Darlington's a community organisation, 5% of the profit every year goes into the community fund. And it's very much, it's an organisation where with 160 people, we've worked really hard to get the culture to work. And that's what I want to talk to you really about today. I'm going to do this in the form of 2 short presentations. And you'll probably find these on the Substack, but I will send Andy a PDF of these after the event so he can distribute it if you want to. The idea is we spend about 5 or 10 minutes on a presentation and then we have a chat about it. So let me just put this up because there is, if I could just remember how to use Teams on a Mac, we should be okay. So it's this one and it's this one. And I hope what you're now seeing, if I make this big, does that say 3 ambiguous words on a green background?
It says colleague monthly in front of it. It does now, yeah.
It does now. Okay, fine. Yes, so I'm hoping now. I'm hoping now it's changed to your slide, Andy, which is the CCPL Faculty Leadership Lunch. Is that right? Has it moved, or has it been very slow?
It's just moving. Yep. It's now merging.
Wow. Okay.
Yes, it's now. Yes, it has.
All right. Okay. So I'm sorry. This is not quite as fast as you see it on the screen. Now, what Andy asked you in this, and let's just look at the 4 questions that Andy asked you. Okay. So you should begin to see this build in front of you, and I'm just going to highlight some words that are on there. So there's 2, leader and culture should have just been ringed out. And of course, culture is also mentioned in the other 3. Now, the problem with these words is they're quite ambiguous. And you will have answered the questions in the context of your understanding or your thinking of what leader and culture means. So what I want to do in this first session is to just simplify for you what this means. And whatever answers you might have come up with this, and you might not have had time to do it, I appreciate that, but whatever answers you come up with this, just see if your answers change as I begin to develop the theme. So 26 years ago, I'm writing a book. 26 years ago, I'm not writing the book. 26 years ago, I'm doing a master's degree at University of Exeter Business School, and we had a visiting professor on leadership, John Adair. And if you go into any bookshop, you'll find many leadership books written by John Adair. And John came in and he asked us this question: what one word sums up leadership? Now, I don't know about you, but I had not thought it would be possible to sum up one word. 7 years ago, I'm writing a book that Andy's referenced, Ensuring General Wisdom. And that is a quote from the 19th century. And if you read the book, you'll understand where it's come from. And I was writing, as part of that, a chapter on culture, because it's about how non-executive directors should do their job. And if you're a non-exec, you need to try and understand the culture of the business. You need to do that. And so I write this chapter on culture. And then about a month or so later, I came back to edit it. And as I read it, I realized it was the biggest load of rubbish I'd ever read in my life. And I was bored, and I'd written it. So this wasn't a strong start, really. So I went back to basics. Remembering the share question, I asked myself the same one: what one word sums up culture? So we now have 2 questions, 2 words that we're looking for. I'm not going to play games. I'm going to tell you what they are. They're in the book. The one word that sums up leadership is influence. If you cannot influence other people, you cannot lead. You need to influence other people to do something quicker, to do something tomorrow that they thought they might do next month, to turn left when they all want to turn right. This is all about, now there's lots more to leadership than influence, but if you imagine that you're building a palace of knowledge, if you like, about leadership, then one of the keystones to your palace is that word influence. And for culture, the word is behavior. If you go back to your team, whether you're a team leader or whether you're in a team, it doesn't matter. And you ask people, what's the culture like around here? And then just listen. Now, I know this will be very tough for the blokes, but do your best, guys. If you just listen, you will in the end hear people telling stories about behavior. It's absolutely a solid gold. Now, what's very interesting then is if you get into this kind of ambiguity, somebody comes to you and says, I want you to go into this part of the hospital, or this part of the integrated care system, or this nursing home, or this social, and I want you to lead a culture change. What on earth does that mean? However, you've now got two new words. And what that means is this. And now, I can't speak for you, but at this point, I am cooking on gas. Because now I think I know what it is that I need to do. I need to study what are the behaviors in this team. And then work out what are the ones I want, what are the ones I don't want. And a bit like Sherlock Holmes, the dog that didn't bark, what are the ones that aren't there that I really would like? So influence a change in behavior. And this takes us to a third word. Now, I spent 6 years working for the Financial Conduct Authority, which is the financial services equivalent of CQC. And any CQC report that you read, and of course, CQC reports are published. The Financial Conduct Authority cannot publish its reports because if it and the prudential regulator, which is equivalent to what used to be Monitor in the NHS, if you publish bad financial information about a bank, then you cause a bank run. So all of the reports that CQC publishes and Ofsted publishes, the financial regulators can't. But conduct appears again and again in CQC reports as it does. So what's conduct about? And you'll see here, this is the dictionary definition. You've got the word behave, and you've got managed or directed. So you've got culture and you've got leadership. And conduct is behavior over time. I want you to think about that. So if somebody misbehaves in your team today, they make a gaffe, or they have an excited explosion of temper because they've had enough, if that happens once, it's a one-off. But if that is happening every single day with all of the team, that isn't a one-off anymore. That's the conduct of your team. So it's worthwhile putting that into some context. And conduct is where leadership meets culture. So I'm sorry if these slides are building very slow for you. I'm trying to compensate for that. It's also, of course, where influence meets behavior. So this is conduct. And there's a big, big question around conduct. Is there a point at which you forget about it? Now, in the financial regulator, I'm convinced and sure that CQC has the same concept, conduct risk, the risk of misconduct, the risk of very bad regular behavior. What does it look like? Over time, everything's gone really great, and all of a sudden it isn't. So it might be going badly in your personal life, it might be going badly in your work life. If you're really unlucky, it might be going badly both at the same time. What is happening at that point is the risk of people doing something bad increases. The risk of misconduct increases. And if you're the leader of the team, whether you're the CEO or you're leading a small team somewhere in the NHS, you're trying to keep that bottom line, you're trying to keep that conduct risk low. And the difference between the curve and the line is all about you. It's all about you. And it's all about your ability to withstand pressures that hit you and push you in the direction of perhaps doing the wrong thing. And that takes us to decisions. There are three sorts of decisions, and I'm putting two of them up for the moment, and we will discuss this in more detail a bit later on. You have a decision-making process, right? Here is a reasonably good one that you might use if you've got a big decision to make. You obviously can't do it if you're making a quick decision, but we'll leave that for the moment. We'll come back to it. But of course, after you've made a decision, it's always a pretty good idea to tell people who are affected about the decision that you've made. Amazingly, this is something that senior management just seem to forget all the time. But anyway, let's leave that to one side. So what's the definition of a good decision? A good decision is one where you've had the time to use that process properly. A poor decision is where you've made a decision and you haven't had the time to do that, or you forgot to do it, or you've got a really bad hair day, having fallen out with your partner, come into work, it's pouring with rain, you're wet through, and somebody has a go at you, and you have a decision to make, and you're not in the right frame of mind. Decision. Now, the irritating thing is you can do all of that processing for a good decision, and it still turns out in the end to be the wrong decision. And the irritating thing about the poor decision is you do none of that stuff, but you just strike lucky and it turns out well. All I can say is you're more likely to get a good result out of good decisions than you are out of poor decisions. And the reason I mention it is because, back to the little chart on the left, is you get pushed and pushed and pushed to the right. It's about your decision making. It's about your decision making. So you never judge a decision. Never, that should say, never judge, always judge a decision. Sorry, never judge a decision by its outcome. So if the decision turns out to be wrong, it doesn't mean you didn't do your job properly, because you could have gone through all the right process, made the right decision at the right time, having consulted the right person, but circumstances change. What's a bad decision? Because that's the third one. That's the third one. A bad decision is where you consciously decide to do something which harms somebody else. You consciously decide to get yourself out of a hole by passing the blame to somebody who had nothing to do with it, or by hiding some documentation, or by treating people badly and pretending that you're not, or by being a bully and thinking you can get away with it. These are all bad decisions, and there's never an excuse and there's never a good reason for it. I interviewed a young CEO of an Irish bank after the big banking crisis, and she said this to me, how difficult it had been for her as the pressure mounted and the pressure mounted, and they thought that they might wind up with a bank that had to be put out of business. This is what she said. She had it on the whiteboard of her room, and all of her team could see it. And it's not a bad thing to bear in mind. You might not be able to go through this being proud of every decision you take, because you might fall at some point, but trying is really important. So that's the book. That's the first presentation. This is me stopping, and we're now going to have a chat. If I can only work out what's happened to my team slide, so I can stop the share. Oh, it's down here, isn't it? I just love the way Microsoft hates Apple and Apple hates Microsoft. Got it. Go back. Proxy server view. There we go. So the overall question is, we've probably got about 15 or 20 minutes. Andy asked you to answer 4 questions. Just looking and listening to what I've just said, does that take you in a different direction if you had a chance to answer those questions? Does it put you in mind of some other things? So over to you. Always hard to be the first one to speak.
I'll jump in, shall I?
Oh, your hand up. Yeah, please.
I was just really interested that the sort of words that I put down around what makes a good leader actually are all summarized by particularly by the influencer and the behavior. So, the leading by example, the supporting, I don't think I would have ever come up with those words, but it's really interesting how the sort of words that I were using all relate to those two.
Yeah. Back in the day, David, I was in charge of, you probably got a Nationwide Building Society, in charge of their branch network. So at the time, that was 800 branches in all 4 nations of the UK, and I had this fantastic sales manager. We had 400 salespeople out in the network. And Bruce had your point about the example. Bruce always used to say, he was the sales manager for the national team, that people would always listen to what you said, but they'd always follow your feet. And if you said, I'm going left, but you walked right, they'd follow your feet. And so the point about the example is massive. It really is absolutely massive. I'm going to move to Sarah, whose hands, if that's okay, David. Thank you very much for those thoughts.
Thank you. It's a question really, John, for you with all your experience, along the lines of the comment I wrote in the chat about thankfully nowadays. Do you feel there's been a huge transition between that kind of blame culture? Oh, I've frozen my camera. I'm gonna I want it to come back. That blame culture, that whole dragging people over the coals when something's gone wrong. Do you feel there's been a big change in the commercial world along those lines? If there's a big misconduct. Yeah, go
on. Not in bits. I mean, I'm now. There was a big crisis in 2012 that led to a big statutory inquiry of banking standards. It's kind of generally the whole thing. What came out of that was a complete change in regulation for financial services. So now I am personally regulated. So to become the job I've got at the Darlington, the non-exec, the regulator had to say, yeah, he can have the job. And they could have said no, and I wouldn't have been able to do it. And they also have expectations around. So they've given me two responsibilities because I chair the risk committee. I've got two responsibilities given to me by the regulator. These are prescribed responsibilities. And the first thing they would do if something went wrong at Darlington is come to me and say, you're supposed to be in charge of risk. What the hell were you doing? So that has raised accountability in financial services boards. And it's interesting that the non-executive directors were included, whereas in many outside they're not. I think the short answer is not generally, Sarah. I wouldn't say it's improved. It's down to the attitude and the behaviours of the people at the top, the point that David was making. This business about, as I said, if you say I'm going to go left and you actually walk right, people will walk right with you. So I wouldn't say so. I think it is. You've had a lot of inquiries, as we all know. I sort of go back to Mid-Staffs and Morecambe Bay, and there's evidently going to be one for Countess of Chester. They have all driven thinking in the NHS about this whole bit. And one of the things I will talk about as we go through this programme is upward communication, because I teach on the MBA direct apprenticeship down at Exeter, and the one thing I tell, and these are relatively young people, 20s and 30s, taking the MBA, many of them coming into management the first time, you've got one job, actually, as a leader and a manager. You've got one job. How do you get upward communication to you to work really well? And how do you get upward communication from you to your boss to work really well? Because the kind of stuff that went wrong at Mid-Staffs was nobody had a clue what was going on. And it's to me, it was always utterly bizarre when I read this report. So none of the non-executive directors walk around the wards then. I mean, that to me is just unbelievably, well, I'll shut up because you know more about it than I do anyway. So I wouldn't say there's automatically been an improvement, Sarah, but I think people are now talking about this stuff. And I think the NHS is getting ahead of the game as far as the commercial world is concerned. Although I'm sure with all the pressures of the winter in the NHS, again, you don't think that's the case at all. I'm going to move on because Sheila's got her hand up as well. Thank you, Sarah. I hope that was okay.
Hi, thanks, John. I think, that was really insightful for me. And I think I've often thought about leadership and culture, but actually pulling out specifically the conduct, because I tend to have always put that within the sort of the culture bucket. But I think for me, my three words were integrity, passion, and caring as much, if not more, for the people you serve than you do for yourself and your own self-interest. Yeah. To be honest, and you can sum all of that up with just integrity. So I think for me that is kind of the overriding word or concept in terms of how in each of the sort of scenarios where things have gone badly wrong, you will find that there was virtually no integrity in terms of many of the people that were, at the top, etc., or actually throughout the organisation. So, so that's just my little two penneth. But that whichever way we skin that cat, it always comes back for me to that word, and the actions that
Yeah.
go with it.
You're absolutely right. Again, back to my experience in financial services, my personal supervision by the authorities gives us conduct rules. And you'd be unsurprised to know that conduct rule number 1 is you must act with integrity. Not would you mind integrity, or on Saturday afternoons could you, but you must act with integrity. Because the Bank of England's never slow at coming forward with some clarity. That's really interesting. Just give me your 3 words again, Shun. You said integrity. There's something else you triggered in my mind as well. I forgot what you said.
Integrity, passion, and then the bit about, I mean, I summed it up just with caring, but actually what I really meant by that is caring as much for the people you serve.
There's lots of people talk about leadership styles and different sorts of leaders, and what you're describing is what's known as a servant leader. And the interesting thing is that the military academy of Sandhurst, where all officers have to pass out before they can become officers, the motto is serve to lead. And there's a complete expectation that you look after your people before you look after yourself. And that's absolutely crucial. It's about the whole, it's integrity, and it's about setting an example. Thank you very much, Sheila. Sarah, I can see you've got a hand up.
I think my point kind of speaks to a lot of what other people already said, in that for me, leadership is around empowerment. So empowerment throughout the whole organisation, and that bit that you're talking about in terms of being able to communicate upwards. So empowering people by creating an environment where their voice is valued and that they are able to contribute and to make changes within their kind of zones of influence, and really from a whole team perspective, but also from an individual kind of perspective in terms of understanding really those individuals that you're working with and in building them up as well.
Yes, you're absolutely right. It is back to this point about getting upward communication. You've got to establish a degree of trust, and we've got a short presentation before we finish this lunchtime where I'll explain this a bit better. But you've got to create in your team the feeling that they can trust you, that they can say to you, "Do you know what, Sarah? That's not the greatest idea you've ever had." Or they come to you with this really half-baked idea that it's very easy to say, "That's the stupidest idea I've ever heard." And of course, if you do that, you'll never hear another idea from them. And in the stupid idea, there could be the germ of something really valuable. So yeah, really good point, Sarah. I'm going to take questions from Tim and Pete, and then I'm going to move on to the next session, if that's all right. So it'll be time for some more chat. Tim, over to you. Thank you, Sarah.
You're on mute, Tim.
I think you're on mute. You're on mute, Tim.
Hear me now?
Yep, got it.
Thank you. Device settings. Yeah, John, thanks for that. You mentioned some of the factors that can influence behaviours and conduct. And for us as leaders, when that's the case, there's been a disagreement with a partner, our mood and our mental health is compromised in some way. So to what extent, do you see in successful leaders that you've worked with before, that kind of sharing of how we're feeling and how our circumstances are affecting our behaviours? Or is it, I've heard leadership compared to acting before, where you're presenting a sort of version of yourself that looks resilient and dependable and resolute in the face of adversity. And where's that kind of balance to make sure that you've achieving that kind of respect, and that your team wanting to run through brick walls for you, but also being able to channel and share how you're feeling in yourself?
Yeah, I think it is a fine balance, and certainly it's something that if I go back to the early days of my career, you never would you have heard anybody at a senior level discussing how they were feeling about anything. You've got to with your team, the best thing you can do, even under pressure, is try to appear calm. And it's really tough, and I get that. But there's also a limit to it, because let's say you're leading something through a change, and we'll discuss this again a bit later on in the session, in one of the sessions. you've got to try and remain optimistic as you take people through an uncomfortable period. But if the uncomfortable period is turning out to be really badly wrong, then at some point you've got to say, we're going to have to rethink this. We're going to have to do another think, rather than you sort of get trapped into lying about how wonderful things are when they're not. And that is a tricky thing. I think as well, if you're sharing with your team, I think you've always got to not worry them that you're not going to be able to do the job properly. It's really amazingly difficult. And if you're looking for kind of emotional support, which we all do from time to time, then you probably want to look to either a peer or somebody outside the organization, a mentor or something, because what you're trying to do with your team is to let them feel that they can trust you to get them through. And that's the tricky one. It's a fantastic point, Tim. Can I move over to Pete now, if that's okay? Pete Best.
Hello there. Yeah, thank you for that. The 3 words I wrote down at the beginning were encouraging, challenging, and supporting. But again, I think they're kind of fairly well captured by the ones that you covered off. But the question I had is just, in your perspective, how easy is it to create a different team culture which is right, in terms of the behaviour and the conduct, if that varies from what the organisational picture looks like? I'm just wondering whether a team can be so different to the organisation, or whether that's a significant limiting factor.
Yeah, no, the team's culture is more set by the team leader than it is by the organisation. So this is why, and we'll again, sorry to keep saying we'll cover it later in the series, but this is why upward communication is so very difficult. If you're a CEO and you passionately believe in upward communication, you want to work it really well, and then about 2 levels below you, there's a manager who's an unreconstructed narcissistic autocrat who will take nothing from anybody, and there's actually a bit of passive aggressive bullying going on at the same time. Within his or her team, you've got a completely negative culture, even if the organization is working well. So I think there's a little bit of, well, what can I do about it? The culture in this place is so rubbish. Is easily a trap to fall into. What you should be trying to do is the very best you can for your own team, and then what can I do to try and influence a better culture in the overall organization? Many organizations and big ones like you guys, I mean, particularly with the NHS now trying to put the free at the point of access NHS together with you have to pay for it in a care home bit. I mean, there's a bit of a culture clash there for a start. And it's nothing to do with the people that work in those parts of the care system. But you've got to try and get people to do the best they can. But you've also, I think, got to be seen to be collaborative with your peer group. And this is something that easily gets forgotten under pressure. And being collaborative with other people at your level, and one level above and one level below, across the whole of the area that you work in, is a big signal to your own team that they should be doing the same. But if you are kind of, I'm the boss of my bit and I'll look after you guys, but I ain't talking to those sods over there, then you're creating the environment where they all think that there are sods over there. So this whole bit about, the management textbooks will call it silos. It's driven by the behavior of the people at the top of the silos. I'm going to move on to the next presentation, if that's all right, and we do come back to me on that. I'm just going to do battle with Microsoft again, if that's all right. Here we go. Right. So this, and we should be saying leading culture by not letting it lead you. I hope that makes some sense. You can see that. Right. So influence, behavior, leader culture change, and that became influencer change in behavior. So just to recap what we were talking about, and the conduct is where leadership meets culture, or in our simpler, straightforward language, influence meets behavior. Now, this looks like a really trite statement that you see on a poster on a meeting room wall. It's really important, and we will talk about strategy in another session. But for you, if you're leading a team within the NHS, your strategy is, what would I like my team to look like in 12 months' time? What would I like to hear the team saying in 12 months' time? What would I like to read the team writing in 12 months' time? What would I like to see the team, how would I like to see them behaving in 12 months' time? So your strategy is my view of what the future state of the team I currently have, and this applies at CEO level as well as it applies at first level manager level. So the reason that culture, and you need to understand it, is so important, because if you've got this plan of how you want to improve things, and culture can eat it for breakfast, then you want to be really interested in culture. So I'm going to draw you a picture, and this will come in one of the slides to Andy. Imagine here's your team in the big rectangle, and it could be, if it's the hospital, it could be the CEO of the hospital with the board in the big rectangle. So the first thing you need to do is work out what's the purpose, and we will have a session on purpose. In other words, what's your team there for? You know, when I'm down at on the MBA, and the counter question is, what would society miss if the RD&E didn't exist? So there's a question for you in your own team. What's the purpose of this team in the grand scheme of things? And what would the NHS miss if we weren't here? What's the value that we add? That's really what purpose is about. And once you've done that, you can then start to say, right, these are the kinds of things, this is how I want to behave, how I want to be seen to behave, these are behavioral standards I want from people, and then you have to communicate it. So at an organizational level, this is done by the public face of the board, which is the big box, by the CEO. And this is what I call stated purpose. Now, the issue then is that people have this cute faith, this cuddly faith that this will now happen in practice. Doesn't work that way, because at the top we have step 1, and at the bottom we have step 3, and the bit that's missing in the middle is what drives behavior, because that stated purpose does not drive behavior. It sets out what you want. This is what I want. And any of you with children, or you've had young children, and you say to them, I want you to go to bed at 6:30, that's your stated purpose. My question is, if you do absolutely nothing else, what time do you think they'll go up the stairs? It won't be at 6:30. So what drives behavior? Do the people at the top trust the people at the bottom? And do the people at the bottom trust the people at the top? It's the number 1. Somebody mentioned integrity, it's in there. Decision making. How are decisions made? Communication, not just down the organization, because this is what people think of usually when you use the word communication in a corporate sense, but up the organization. And finally, incentives, which could be financial and non-financial. The problem is when those incentives ain't where they should be, because nobody's thought about them. Sorry, drivers, not incentives. When those drivers aren't where they should be. And if that's the case, remembering what I said, I would like you all to turn left, but then your feet go right. And this is what you will get. And it may be that that behavior in practice is unacceptable. So all the fine words in the big box don't get you anywhere if you haven't thought about these 4 drivers. And we will have a lunch and learn session on each of these 4 to get you to think about it and to try and make it as simple as possible. But this is culture in action. Culture doesn't, you know, people say, oh, it's what people do when the boss isn't around. Yeah, but how do you get them to do what you want them to do when the boss isn't around? And it's all about this kind of diagram. Drivers of behavior, just very quickly. Trustworthiness is number 1. And what does it mean? There's a British philosopher called Dame Honora O'Neill, O-N-O-R-A, O'Neill, and you'll find a TED talk by Dame Honora on exactly this subject. She says that for you to trust me, you need to see me in me 3 qualities. You need to see me as honest, competent, and reliable. And if you see me as honest, competent, and reliable, I am somebody that you can put your trust in. So the question for all of you that are managing teams on this call, does your team see you as honest, competent, and reliable? And for those of you who are managed by people, do you see your boss as honest, competent, and reliable. Now, taking ourselves back to stated purpose and purpose in practice, you remember the diagram. In case you don't, here it is again. Here's your stated purpose. This is what we're being told about the organisation, how marvellous it is. In practice, 9:05 on a rainy Monday morning, we're seeing this, we're hearing this, we're reading this, we're experiencing this. And so what that's done is pop the honesty bubble. Because why should you trust anybody at the top of the organisation if they tell you how wonderful it is, and actually in practice it isn't? And that goes to team leaders as well, which is the balance that we were talking about earlier between being calm and confident and actually not acknowledging the truth. Trustworthiness is number one. Honesty is at the center of it all. And then that takes you to the other three drivers: decision-making, communication, and incentives. And that's where we're able to stop in exactly the same way. Spookily enough, to manage Microsoft. Excellent. So there we are. So again, reflections on what we've just seen. We'll return to that diagram, that culture model again, and we will fill in the gaps at the moment where you're thinking, what does he mean by trustworthiness? What does he mean by decision making? Blah, blah. And why is this important? We'll do those in several sessions as we go forwards. Any thoughts? Sarah, go for it.
Hi, I popped it in the chat, but kind of similar to what you were saying in the previous bit around communication upwards in organisations. I've been involved in many organisations actually where they are struggling, and the people on the ground that are kind of living that behaviour and culture and day to day often are wanting to drive the change and improve the culture. And some thoughts around kind of leading upwards in terms of that cultural change as well, not just kind of from above in terms of setting this is what we want and the drivers downwards.
I'll come back again and again to this point that the job one is to try and get upward communication to work, upward from you and upward to you. And you aren't going to have a successful team or as team as that could be as successful as it could be, do the best they can, if there isn't great upward communication to you. And there's a whole lot of hard work got to be put around that. Thanks, Sarah. I've just got a badge that says QCM Healthcare External, so forgive me for being impersonal, but it's over to the hand that's up at the moment. I don't have a name.
Yeah, sorry, John. It's Chris Collins.
No apology.
I obviously run a team for QCM Healthcare as a registered manager, and for years I've always had this open, honest, and transparent approach to things. So I've listened with interest, and it was really useful. So thank you to today. I think the feedback I get is that people sometimes have said to me, "We can see through you because you're that transparent." And I think sometimes it's difficult because you make decisions that are unpopular with some people. But at the end of the day, I think it's all the things that have been here today have been really useful. And I think I know how I operate, and I think it's obviously, will give me some thought as well. I think it's important when you deal with service users, colleagues and other organisations that we are open, honest and transparent. And I think communication is a big thing. And I think sometimes that's where we get let down. And I just wanted to say, I think it's been really, it will give me some thought later on. Thank you.
Good. I'm pleased to hear that. I mean, just picking up the note about the gossip mill, I've just seen the Hannah Fry podcast that's been put in there, and your point, Chris, about being transparent. There's a great book called The Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson, and it's about psychological safety. And you've got to avoid the view that psychological safety means having nice conversations, which is exactly your point, Chris. There are times when the conversation you have to have with somebody isn't the greatest one they ever wanted to hear. The important thing, of course, is you're doing it in private. So criticising private and praising public is, you know, never a bad rule to have. But we'll talk a bit about psychological safety as we go through. But fundamentally, it's a very complicated way of saying upward communication. I mean, that's what it boils down to. And there aren't. I mean, you can be forced into dilemmas. There's a classic management dilemma, which is you are told by your boss that 3 members of your team are going to have to lose their jobs for whatever reason, downsizing, whatever non-transparent description is being given. And then one of you, but you can't tell anybody until it's announced next week. And then one of your team walks up to you and says, I've heard this rumor that 3 of us are going to lose our jobs. Is it true? What do you do? It's the classic dilemma. And you are left in those positions from time to time. So, you know, it's very easy to say be transparent all the time. There are some things you can't tell people at the time, and you can get really caught by that kind of dilemma. All you can try and do is try and encourage that transparency you've just been talking about. Donna, I can see you've got a hand up. Thanks, Chris. Thank you very much.
Hi. Yeah, so I work for Norfolk Community Health and Care Trust, and I think what's interesting about sort of how I'm reflecting on a lot of things that I'm hearing from everybody here is, I think when we have verbal communications, face-to-face communications, we can react more in the moment and perhaps get things a bit more right. But with so much communication happening virtually, emails, social media, there's, you know, lots of media, authoritative media gets hold of things. So I think when we're looking at the written communication, perhaps there's a tendency for that to come across in the wrong way, or perhaps as it wasn't intended. So I think leadership, yes, it's the acting, it's the speaking, but we also need to remember how it comes across in the emails, how it comes across in the team communications, and from the top down, how those written communications are happening, particularly as we are so widely transforming into multi-organizational and partnership communication. It's all about getting it at the right time to the right people. So we're not hearing it from the EDP or national press or something like that.
Yeah, it is very difficult. And of course, we're all subject to FOIA as well. So freedom of information requests, you've got to be desperately careful about what goes into email in case you're setting yourself up for the future. He said at great personal cost, as I was hit a few times on a regulator for having done that. You're absolutely right. And of course, the other thing is with emails, how often do we stop and read them out loud before we send them? I mean, the amazing thing to me is, and it's something I worked hard at with the book when I wrote it, the best advice you can ever give to anybody really is, if you're writing, is to read it out loud, because you'll suddenly discover you're using words and language that you'd never use in conversation. So why have you written it that way? And use short words, not long words, and all that kind of stuff. You know, I'd like to communicate this to you. I'd like to let you know. Well, why would you like? You'd never say this in, you know, I'd like to communicate this to you, Donna. You know, I'd like to let you know. That's a big difference. Also, of course, I mean, particularly when you get the very long emails that come down from internal comms or the CEO or whatever, the ability of the human race to read different things into the same email is enormous. So you make a very good point about written communications. Very good point.
And I think with emails as well, it's like, who are you copying into that email? Many years ago in a different organisation, I had raised a particularly contentious point with a couple of individuals, and the whole team was copied in with a very blunt and inappropriate response. And I thought to myself, if I'd have raised that in a team meeting in front of all of our colleagues, would you have had the same response in such a big in front of such a big audience? So I think it's if you wouldn't have that conversation with that individual in front of lots of other people, don't copy them all into an email, that sort of thing. So I think I think I mull over too much about the emails that I'm writing. I spend far too long making sure I've got the right language.
Is it? I mean, it's the blizzard of WhatsApps and signals and iMessages that you get as well that are going on in the organisation. I don't know whether there's a messaging system that you guys favour using, but WhatsApp gets used to. I mean, WhatsApp is now a really big problem in financial services, and the regulator is fining firms where you've had, for instance, traders talking to each other on WhatsApp in the belief that nobody can see it. And the truth of the matter is it's all retained in the business, so they can. And it's a way of circumventing that, or people think it's a way of circumventing FOIA. But you're right. I mean, I think because we now have at least one generation, if not maybe 1.5 generations, who can't remember a world where there wasn't a text message and there wasn't iMessage and Signal and Telegram and all the rest of it. People have got far too used to sending messages rather than talking to people. And that's the other thing. And I know it takes a bit longer. I'm going to stop there. Abhijit, I hope I pronounced your name right. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks. It's Abhijit, right? Correct. Could you expand on the honesty bit of it? The culture we see from national to local level is to paint a very, very positive picture of about everything, anything. So how best we are. So, where does that honesty sort of like, what exactly would you mean by, honesty, and how much do we go? Because yes, I understand to have a good morale in the team, we can't sort of, we have to focus on the positives and many times ignore the negatives or ignore the bad news things. So could you expand on that, please?
I'll do my best. I think what you have to draw a distinction between honesty and confidentiality. So there are some things that a team cannot be told yet because it's still being cooked and it's confidential. Maybe we've decided to move this team from this building to this building, and before we do that, we need to make sure it's the right decision and all the things need to be put in place. So at some point they'll be told because maybe they don't want to have to commute to the other side of town. So that's a confidentiality thing. It's not being dishonest, not telling them. I think the dishonesty bit comes in where, let's say you are transitioning a team across town, and they say, well, this is going to cost me money. What are you going to do about it? And the answer is, we're going to think about it and we'll do something for you. And then nothing happens at all. So that's where the dishonesty bit comes in. I think being honest, it's about being straight with people, but drawing the distinction that it's not. You've got to recognise that confidentiality is different. Does that help?
Yes, yeah, but absolutely, you're clear on that point. I was thinking about, if you see at the health outcomes, if you look at the waiting lists, if you look at the staffing problems, the spin which comes from national to local is how fantastic everything is going on. So, that I was focusing on. And how do we how do we deal with that? And how, as a team leader, you could, pass on such message?
I think you share a problem in the NHS with the military, with education, just to name two, which is that the very top of your organisation is a politician, and of course the politicians' incentives are to look good for the next election. The politicians' incentives might then override what is the truth of what you're just describing around recruitment problems and waiting lists and budgets and all the rest of it. I can't actually help with any of that. All you can do as a manager is to try and respect your team by being honest with the team and not getting honesty mixed up with breaking confidences that you shouldn't be breaking at the moment. But I mean, it's that there will be. This is about, does your team trust you and do you trust your team? does your team trust you that as far as you're able to, they know that you tell them and be honest with them about the situation that we're in, and they will recognise that you can't tell them about some things. It's trying to build that, I think, more than anything else. It's a tricky one.
No, but that's very useful.
Yeah, I think
Very,
it's part
very
of being the
useful.
human
Yeah,
race
yeah.
as well. Right. Any other thoughts, folks?
I think just to move slightly in a different direction, Dawn mentioned in the chat something. I don't know, Dawn, whether you want to, we're just looking at your organisations that can thrive when they not only know what they do, but why and how.
Yeah, it's just an observation really, that I think a lot of the time we talk about what and when, you know, what are we going to do and when we're going to do it. But a lot to do with behaviour and culture is actually talking to people about why they're doing it, so they understand it,
Spot
they
on.
commit.
Yeah, spot on.
And then
Yeah.
from that, you talk about how they are going to approach it, they feel supported and so on. So I definitely agree with you about the what, but I think why and how are equally important, and that actually shapes the culture and behaviours, and they feel supported.
Yeah, I mean, and this is about, do you trust your team? So when we talk about strategy, you're going to say to yourself, this is how I'd like my team to look in 1 year's time or 2 years' time, whatever it might be. You need to answer the question, why? Why do you want it to look that way or sound that way or be that way, and be able to explain that? And then it's like, you know, if you've got something that needs to be done by some of your team or all of the team, you say, this is what I want you to do, but you don't then go about telling them how to do it. You say, I want you to get on with it, and I'm here if you want some help, if you want some advice. This came out about 2 weeks ago. I was on an all hands call for the Darlington. I mean, when I say all hands, there's only 160. It's the cuddliest, smallest organisation I've ever worked for. And they've just moved the branch in Darlington. So their flagship branch has just moved from a really crappy location between a rundown pub and Paddy Power to a really much better location on the main high street. And the CEO said, I saw this building 2 years ago. It was damp and it was horrible. And I said to Louise, and Louise is the head of retail, I said to Lou, this is the branch I want. I want you to get it to be our flagship. And he said, the next time I walked into it was when we opened it a week ago. Now, I know he will have had conversations with Louise all the way through on the budget and on all the rest of it. But the point was, what I think maybe he didn't know he was saying it, but what he basically said was, I got complete trust that she's going to do this for me. And I didn't have to sit on her shoulder every Friday morning saying, well, you know, what's the wallpaper going to be? So that's the trust in your team. Are you able to say to your team, this is what I want, this is what I want to happen, and this is why I want it to happen. Can you get it done for me next September? And please let me dig you out. So you're absolutely right, Dawn. It's a really strong point to have made. Andy, we've got 2 or 3 minutes left. So any wrap-up points you want to make?
All that I wanted to say, John, was I had some comments in the chat about the signal. So we will try and deal with that next time. So I do appreciate that makes that slightly difficult, but we'll try and manage that.
Sorry, this is. Am I not communicating very well with you? Is that
no?
The
sound, John, was breaking up occasionally, but I think we can probably have a chat about that afterwards. But right, that's fine. I just wanted to say I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much. If you have done, and even if you haven't done, we are running another one on the 9th of January, which then basically leaves us to say 2 things. One, we are doing this clinical and care professional development kind of program throughout the system. I'd like to hear what you think, not just about this, but broadly about what you think we need. I have put a questionnaire in the chat. I'd be very grateful if you would fill that in. We will act on it. I will give you an update on where we're going as these sorts of progress. This is our offer that reaches out across whoever in the ICS wishes to join. So please, if you've enjoyed it, pass that across. If there's anything that you think that you want that we haven't covered, we can modify the sessions as we go along, and John does. And we're intending us to get us all not on the same page, because we all have a personal approach to this, and the disagreements are as important as the agreements, but is to just chat and get together and try and see each other's positions. So I think, John, for me, you've kind of brought that together really nicely. I think you've provoked a really good conversation and some thinking for people. So on everybody's behalf, thank you very much for your time, and I very much look forward to hearing from you again in January.
Yep.
And then, strange though it may be, because it says only the 8th of December, but I will say, because I won't see you again until then probably, thank you all for coming. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you have a very good Christmas. And you go and take care of yourselves. And thank you for everything that you're doing. Cheers.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you. Bye.
All right.
Stay on for a second. You're right, John. I'll just